Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking Podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design.
Craig Knight is a workplace psychologist who runs Identity Realisation, a psychological organisational consultancy that helps people and companies maximise their impact. Craig's research is leading the industry in its analysis of the impact of design in the workplace, and his findings turn the design process on its head, with huge impact on well-being, health and productivity. In this episode, we're introduced to the three elements of empowerment. We discover why realising your identity is so important to people in the workplace, why managers need to let go of control, and how looking at ceiling tiles prompted Craig to explore a different approach to design impact.
Craig, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. I wanted to just talk about how you work, particularly in the kind of furniture and interiors design realm. Also a bit about what you do broadly. Company's called Identity Realisation. Can you just give us a bit of background about how you set that up and also what it means?
The company's been running for a while now. We set it up as a company called Prism. Prism stood for Psychological Research into Identity and Space Management back in 2003. We changed the name to Identity Realisation because the key thing in somebody's space is whether they can recognise elements of themselves in it. If they can, that is what makes a good space, rather than, if you like, the luxuriousness of it, the way that you're managed. Whether you can recognise elements of yourself seem to be one of the most fundamental aspects making people feel happy and performing well.
That sort of definition of good space is quite interesting because when I first met you as a younger designer, my definition of good space was probably about aesthetics and a lot about layout and functionality. But the concept of people feeling good within a space was, I think, in the industry quite underdeveloped compared to now. What you were saying was like, oh my God, this is almost like a whole new way of looking at space. You know, it changes the way in which you evaluate space. Yeah. And particularly how successful space is. You're looking at different metrics, aren't you, in terms of evaluating?
I love design. Design is a great and useful tool, but it doesn't seem, if we apply the science to it, to be used awfully well. If you think, for example, of the best place in which you've ever worked, the chances are it wasn't some super high design space. It wasn't led by biophilic design. It wasn't anything like that. It was a space where you got on well with the people, where there was a nice buzz, where you enjoyed what you did. That was what made the space. And we're looking now at how to reincorporate design so that it works to get the atmosphere as well as the aesthetic.
You're talking about a difference between the aesthetics of the space, you know, when we look at the Google office as a kind of a leader of that, I guess, in a way, you know, an amazing looking space, which you think, oh, it looks fantastic. But the difference between that and actually the atmosphere, the social dynamics of that, or the way in which people feel when they're in the space.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I mean, it is, we've been doing this thing since 2003. It is, despite what people say, impossible to purely design a great space. The idea of a design-led solution where a designer goes in and creates this beautiful space, be it Google or the latest biophilic stuff, you can only put people into that space, and then the interactions, the way people are managed in that space, will affect how those people relate to it. So the designer can do as much as they can in terms of getting the look right and the feel right, but they can't guarantee that it will work. That depends on the people within it. So what we need to do, instead of having this concept of the design-led, let us bestow this beautiful Google, biophilic, Red Bull, Microsoft space, We want to look at how we can reincorporate design so that we can work with the people there to get what they want. Because if they get what they want rather than have something given to them, then we can start to develop the atmosphere and realise that identity that is so important to people in the workplace.
And to get that, the engagement of the workforce is pretty critical then.
It's absolutely vital. Yeah. Absolutely. We know we can do some things with design. If you think, for example, of any animal in the world, and we've done these studies now, if you put any animal into the world in a sparse, Spartan space, it suffers. We're no different. If you then take any animal and put it into an enriched space, be it, I don't know, a stick in the case of an ant, or some swings and things to play with if it's one of the great apes, they are much happier, and we're the same. But for those animals to perform at their best, just like us, they need to be free to be able to go and express themselves.
Right, and when I first met you, you were working with test cases where you were introducing artwork and planting chosen by the employees, and the kind of staggering thing to get your head around as a designer is that just by allowing the workers to choose their own artwork and plants, regardless of how it looked, had as much impact in terms of improving the workplace as redesigning the whole space with a singing and dancing interior. And that's the engagement and the involvement of the staff in building their own space.
Pretty much spot on, actually, Jonathan. Yes, that's right. What we found is we had a series of experiments, and as I said, we found that the lean, stark space was always the worst. You know, sometimes the equal worst, because in science you get non-significant results, but always worse when we got significant results. And we could improve that by using design, by having people come in and develop spaces for us. But then we could improve that design space still further by taking the designer out of the process and giving people themselves the same kit of parts the designers were working with and saying, do it yourselves. And you're quite right. What they came up with was often not nearly as pretty as what the designers had done, but the people had done it themselves. They related to it, they were happier in it, and they performed better as a result of that because they had done it themselves.
Yeah, that's quite sobering set of statistics. When you think about all the effort you put in as a designer to think, we're going to make this place look amazing, you know, all my knowledge and experience, and it doesn't make any difference. Yeah.
No, you're quite right. I mean, I am a complete klutz, right? You're a very talented designer.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's not that design doesn't work. We can see design does work. If you have one design that's enriched and one design that's sparse, the design that enriched works far, far better. The Google space works far better than the bland, lean, stark space.
Yeah.
So what we did is, well, how can we reincorporate design? You know some of this. We've worked with you on it. You've been key in a lot of this. So we said, well, rather than having a design-led solution, why don't we have a team-led solution where the designer then becomes part of the team? And by reincorporating design that way, we are finding some extraordinary results. Yeah. So, yes, people do better than design when they're free to do it themselves. But when you add a designer into that mix as well, we then get better results still. So if you like, we've got one stage lean, two stage design, led. The third stage is empowered to do it yourself. And the fourth stage is a led design solution where you reincorporate the designer. So by using led design, we are 2 stages ahead of global best practice.
That's what we have prototyped, as you say. We've done that a few times where we've sought to reimagine the relationship with our clients. And that does, as you say, bring different results because it's the decision process is handed over in a managed way to the staff. So just in talking about the improved results, what are the metrics that you're looking at, and what are the stats that you're coming out with from that led design process?
We're looking at all, as we always do, the key organisational variables. It's no good me being some woolly psychologist and saying you must treat people nicely. We look at things like well-being, we look at things like engagement, happiness, but we also look at some key variables that matter to the bottom line, like productivity, creativity, and we're now starting to look at effective intelligence. And we can improve all of those by significant degrees as we move across the design platforms.
And how do you measure that then?
Well, it depends on various tasks. I mean, you need to use hard and soft measures. If you look at questionnaires, for example, questionnaires are fabulous at looking at how people feel. So you can tell how well they feel, how engaged they are, how satisfied with the jobs they are. But you cannot, for example, use a questionnaire to measure productivity because people have no idea. I'll give you a quick example of that. If you ask, for example, people to say, are you a less than average driver? Only about 20% of people will admit to being a less than average driver, whereas, of course, 50% have to be less than average. And it's the same when people assess their own productivity. So to look at productivity, we need hard, fast measures. So we develop tasks which measure, for example, attention to detail, information management, management supervision, all of these things. And we can then make hard, accurate measures from one situation to another situation and handle control conditions in a scientific, experimental manner.
So that questionnaire is quite important, and I think it's something that lots of designers will think they're doing, because I've in the past had questionnaires I've given to clients, and that level of engagement is good in some ways, but it's not really digging deep into the organisational psychology of the workforce, is it? It might throw up a few useful things for you to design from, but what you're looking at is a more in-depth analysis, or is it, how would you describe it?
Questionnaires themselves are an interesting tool. If you're using a questionnaire and you're doing what's called single item analysis, which is my happiness in the workplace is 10% higher this year than it was last year, or this chair is less comfortable than that chair, you're using what's called single item analysis, which is not awfully good. And what you need to do is cluster questions together to form meaningful scales. You need to run stats on your questionnaire. That's the first thing. And if you're not doing that, you're not using your questionnaire properly. But as you said before, questionnaires themselves aren't very good for hard measures. If they're used properly, they're fabulous tools for understanding how people feel. But if you then want to look at hard, quantifiable metrics, like, for example, effective intelligence, you can't ask people whether they felt clever today or do they feel clever yesterday. It's a nonsense. You need to assess it as a hard measure. So that's what.
Going back to some of the work we've done recently, thinking about the Innovation Centre at Exeter University, we carried out that engagement process, and the questionnaire did throw up some really interesting bits of information, some of which, as a designer with a bit of experience, you might intuitively think, or anticipate. But what struck me with that use of the questionnaire is that it threw up some things we weren't expecting, particularly the issue around privacy being very important. And it flushed out some issues around the use of the kitchen in the space, which was one of the things that the main client, Joe, was very keen on. The questionnaire can often come in to validate your intuition, but the crucial thing, I suppose, which takes it to another level, is the unearthing of little nuggets of real information that you can act on. As
far as questionnaires are concerned, they will validate and challenge what you think when they're run properly. And it did with us, as you say, at the Innovation Centre.
Yeah.
And we got some really useful stuff out of that. And we also, of course, you are a good designer in the sense that you are prepared to play along and do the lead design philosophy, which means that you've got to be fairly brave and put your own ideas out there and have them ready to be discarded by people, because, you are not leading the process of letting somebody else do it. You're feeding your expertise into it. And you handle that very well. And as a result, the design that came out of that was probably not the design that you would have put in originally, but interestingly, neither was it the design that those people would have had themselves had they not benefited from your input.
So that's the benefit of putting the two together, designer tagging on to the team and working up the design.
I'm going to correct you. I wouldn't say tagging on at all. You were the most essential part of that team in many ways, because your ideas were the fulcrum around which most of the discussion centred.
That's true.
So what you said was really useful. So you weren't tagging along. You were utterly essential, but you had, and it's necessary to have, sufficient humility not to try and take over.
I think that's slightly underselling it, aren't I? But I guess in that context, the design input was about creating the options, and then the skill is in stepping back and letting those options be understood by the teams, and then using those as a kind of toolkit to build their own space, So in terms of how this process is seen by the client, it's quite difficult, do you think, for some clients to let go of the power of design? Because often you get senior management taking a real interest in design and not devolving it down. But the process does mean that you've got to let go of control, haven't you, as a manager or an owner, and trust your staff.
I think what we're talking about here is logically quite simple. We have these 4 stages of progression, and there's nothing intellectually difficult about that. It is, however, emotionally really, really hard for managers to back out because they're used to being in charge, they want to be in charge, and it's easier when they're in charge. No? It's much messier when you let everybody have a say in how they want to work. And when somebody says, yes, I'll sign that off, I like it, that's good enough. And it's a fundamental change in management that would break. Well, we go back to Josiah Wedgwood in the 1700s, who came with agile working and multi-skilling. And managers have been in charge really since then. So to break that chain is emotionally really difficult.
And give the trust to the staff to make the right decisions. What we saw, certainly with the first project we did, was that when you ask staff what they'd like, you know, and the worry from the member of the management is that they're going to ask for all sorts of things you can't afford. They're actually quite modest in their aspirations. You know, they're fairly realistic. They want often small, really simple things to change. You know, they highlight those. So it's not a scary. It shouldn't be so scary, you know, as many managers might fear. But that you're saying that letting go. What does that give? How does that benefit there?
There are three elements to empowerment, really, and empowerment is the most important thing at work, and that is autonomy, trust, and resource. And you're giving them in that process all three of those. You're giving them the autonomy to develop their own space, you're trusting them to do it, and you're giving them the resources so they can make their ideas come to pass. So from a psychological perspective, you could not really be doing anything better to make a workspace function. And of course, on top of that, or within that mix, you have design skill to make sure that you have expertise on hand as well. So it's an incredibly virtuous circle that gives you about the most powerful result that we think is possible.
That sounds amazing, doesn't it?
Doesn't sound bad, does it?
It's like good. Yeah.
It's hard to imagine doing something better. And it just takes the management to have the guts and the trust in their people to let them do it. That's it.
In a nutshell.
That's the barrier.
You've been working on the psychological application of design for a few years now. What brought you into that area, particularly in the kind of workplace zone? What sparked your interest in that?
Many, many years ago, I worked in office design myself, and I was in a large company in the northwest of England, and I was asked them how they decide how many people sit in how much space. And the woman who was the facilities manager showed me the ceiling, said we've got, and counted them, 64 ceiling tiles, 8 people, that's 8 ceiling tiles per person, that's how we do it. And I thought, well, that's most egalitarian, 8 ceiling tiles each, but there's probably a better way of dividing up space than that. And that kicked off the whole process. And I got interested then, as the company I was working for was called Steelcase, they were bringing out a new product range, as to how, not how it was put together, I didn't really care about that, but I was very interested in how it affected the people that worked at it, because it was all different shapes. And whether you sat as a convex or a concave shape would affect how you feel, whether you sat close to people or away from people would affect how you feel. And of course, then different organisations were buying that furniture. And there were different management and leadership styles that you then piled on top of the design, all of which had psychological implications for the people that were working in those offices. And that sort of started me down the road where we met, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. So that's, you're very passionate about that, but I'm guessing most designers have got very little of quite a kind of crude understanding of the impact of their designs on the psychology of the people that are using them.
Yes, I would agree with that. And a lot of the time, people want to use me for psychological tricks so that their design or their leadership style works for them. There really aren't any beyond standard biological ones, such as making the space more engaging. And apart from that, you then have to get into the pure psychology of involving the people with whom you work. Not essential if you want to make a space best.
Yes.
You can make it good, but you can't make it best without involving people.
Building that into the design process, I mean, that's the challenge you and I have found, because it is something that does cost money, takes time, and often people, they don't want to spend the money on that, you know. So how can we overcome that? That's a challenge.
Well, yeah, you're right. It does. I think time is the most fundamental thing. But in terms of budget, it doesn't have to cost that much at all. First of all, there are two things. You have the expense of a design-led solution. you can always beat that by spending less money. Because you just give people the same amount of tools you gave the designer, you save the design cost, all that rigmarole, and you can beat that.
Yeah.
But then when you get to the led design process, then again, you don't need to spend any more money. You can still use exactly the same kit. All you're doing is you're then taking a little more time to get to the ideal solution. And that it's just that element of time that will make a phenomenal difference to how people feel and how they perform. The ROI is fantastic for that small amount of extra time.
I don't know whether there's any statistics to show how quickly you can recoup your investment, but certainly from your evidence, it's there. It's a tangible benefit, isn't it? That
I can give you an example if you like. We work. I can't mention the company name. What I can say, it was a very large international firm of auditors, and they had a Lean Six Sigma office. We put into that office £10,000 worth of plants. And because we know how to measure productivity, we found there was an increase in productivity of 15%, equating to £1 to £5 million across the year for £10,000 of the plants.
Right.
Now, that's just enriching the space. We're looking at the lead design solution, increasing productivity compared to lean in the order of about 28 to 30%. So almost twice as much as that.
I mean, that sort of thing is amazing, isn't it? And I mean, we're all very passionate about the power of design, but when you see the tangible results coming through, it's very satisfying, isn't it, to see people really enjoying the spaces that they're working in. Particularly the first project with Nigel, where the staff had helped decorate and lay out and stuff, and they seemed to be thriving and happier. You know, you could sense the atmosphere in the office, couldn't you, when we went to visit?
Yes, and you raised the point earlier about managers finding it difficult, and Nigel was a good case in point. We had to, I remember, rein back quite hard because Nigel wants to talk to you. And as a designer, it was the first time you'd done your job, you wanted to talk to Nigel. And we had to break that link. And Nigel was fantastic about it by putting, 3 people between him and you.
Yeah.
So we made sure that the company got involved, not the MD.
That's critical,
Nigel,
actually, yeah.
And Nigel said, if you remember, he found it incredibly uncomfortable, the whole process, until it was over.
Yeah, and then he's thinking, my God, why didn't I do it years ago, sort of thing. Yeah, that's interesting, though, the hierarchy of those design meetings, because we did appoint a chair who was one of the members of staff, and everything from that point communication-wise went through that person. Typically, you'd be going through the FM manager or the project lead, and the people on the shop floor, as it were, wouldn't even see anything, you know. So it does turn it on its head. But that element is pretty crucial, isn't it, about breaking the hierarchies?
Yeah, well, you raise a really good point. And they talk about things like having workplace champions who will do this kind of thing. But they're not champions. They're what Tom Peters of the Workplace Guru called politicians. They are the people who are, to the extent, management acolytes who get turned on by the idea of career progression. And what happened in the case with Nigel is we got people that weren't really that bothered about career progression, but were very, very bothered about making sure their workplace looked nice. So instead of getting an acolyte-inspired management signed-off solution, we got a lead design solution that really appealed to the people that work there. And it might not have looked as pretty, to be fair, as if we just let you do it yourself because you have lots of talent. But what we had was a solution that worked for them that used your skill as part of it.
I think that's the fascinating sort of takeaway from it, because it's not about delivering the next award-winning photogenic interior, is it? But actually what you are delivering is, you know, an improvement in the quality of the lives of the people working in those spaces, and that's, you know, ultimately what we're trying to achieve. That sort of, for me, flips the whole approach, which makes the lead design process so intriguing and attractive.
You can always beat standard design, but how by reincorporating design, we can then get on to another level. The most important thing is we got around that really odd situation of how we can always exceed top designers. And now we find that we can't. It's just how the design is used.
How design is used as a tool within the process of change has to change.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it is, design thinks it's important. It's not as important as it thinks it is unless it allows itself to be used in a different way when it becomes crucial.
Thanks to Craig for taking the time to talk to me. As you'll have heard from the chat, Craig mentions the importance of employee engagement, and the process that we've been developing together, Led Design, is something that delivers the psychological analysis alongside design development in a neat package that has huge impact on the health, well-being and productivity of the employees involved in it. When organisations follow our led design and engagement process, we can expect a high level of stakeholder buy-in alongside improvements in well-being, productivity, creativity and cognitive performance by as much as 40%. Key features of this process are a non-hierarchical, mixed engagement group formed from across your organisation, stakeholder questionnaires, design workshops to communicate aims and explore design options, and feedback sessions on proposed designs. The process helps your employees engage in the process of change and results in spaces designed to suit the way in which they want and need to work. If you're interested in increasing your productivity and improving the health and well-being of your organisation, get in touch. I'd like to thank Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and valuable advice in the setting of this podcast. There's a link to an interview I had with Dave, which is on Soundart Radio, based in Dartington, in the show notes. Thanks again to Mark Frith for composing the music and all your support and advice along the way, and to Kay Hansen for her planning support and co-hosting role on these and the educational podcasts that we do for the University of Plymouth. We've been introducing the students at the University of Plymouth's interior design course to some of these engagement processes. If you'd like to know how to become a kick-ass interior designer, there's a link to the course in the notes. Next week we talk to Caroline Buckingham. She's an architect and is currently the Vice President of Practice and Profession at RIBA. I'd really like to hear your feedback on the podcast. Leave a comment or get in touch via Twitter. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thank you.